Welcome to Mysterious Goings On, the podcast about creativity, writing, and mystery. Every week, we talk about all kinds of great fiction and meet the people who write it. We also feature explorations about creativity in all walks of life. Your host, Alex Greenwood, will join you right after this.
When Benjamin Gilmer first took his job as a physician at a clinic in rural North Carolina, he had no idea it would lead him to discover one man's tragedy and uncover a nationwide mental health crisis. His debut book, The Other Dr. Gilmer, Two Men, a Murder, and an Unlikely Fight for Justice, takes us inside Benjamin Gilmer's unwilling entry into a harrowing janiform existence, literally taking the place of another physician, Dr. Vince Gilmer, no relation, who had committed a monstrous act. Now, what I thought from the beginning, listeners, was that this book is like a true life, page-turning story of a man who committed an unspeakable crime and the man who wanted desperately to understand why. What I learned after finishing the book was that it was not just about the two Dr. Gilmers. It's about us, our society, and how we treat the most vulnerable among us in our prison system and our health system. What initially began as a journey to understand his predecessor turned into Benjamin Gilmer's life's mission, advocating for prison and social justice reform and speaking up for those who cannot speak for themselves. But don't take my word for it. Let's meet Dr. Benjamin Gilmer. Welcome to Mysterious Goings On.
Thank you, Alex. It's a pleasure to be here. And that was like one of the best elevator pitches I've heard of this book so far. So thank you for that.
Well, you know, it's my day job. I'm a publicist myself sometimes. So very good. But you make it easy. You really do. I enjoyed, we were chatting offline before we got started here and just talking about some ground rules for the interview. And I was telling you that I felt like this was like three books in one. The first third of this book, I felt like you were like a real life character in a Stephen King novel. I mean, you go to, urbane doctor who's got this great resume. He's done all these wonderful things, goes to a very small town and nice people, but some creepy stuff starts happening there, right? And fish out of water, but it's kind of spooky. And then there's another doctor there, or was, that you took his place, and he has the same last name as you. I felt like that. And then the second kind of part of the book gets into this, and it becomes a medical mystery in a lot of ways. And then the third part becomes just this indictment, this searing indictment of our system. I think it's three books in one. And I was just so excited to get you on the show to talk about this wonderful book, The Other Dr. Gilmer. Did you find when you were putting the book together that it was just a normal narrative, just to start from the beginning, that kind of the day you applied for the job and had your interview and just to go from there?
I didn't know what a normal beginning was. I mean, I had yet to have a normal beginning in my professional career. And in fact, nothing's been normal so far. But this for me has been an exploration of many things. Like I think the book represents sort of multiple stories, and it's sort of divided up into three acts in a way. And each of those acts is sort of an act of studentship for me. So it's, the act of discovering this person, this gruesome murder, and what that experience is like to follow in the footsteps of a presumed murderer and assume his life in many ways is what happened. I assumed his life in the clinic and continued living the life that he had always wanted. So, but when I started to write the book, I didn't know like exactly where to start. So I just started telling the story as it unfolded and followed sort of a chronologic pursuit of discovering who this other Dr. Gilmer was. And that really took three different dimensions to get there. And one of those dimensions was, trying to discover myself as a person and as a young doctor. And that took me through some different chapters of my life in the book. So that, the book is ultimately sort of a memoir told in a semi-linear fashion.
Indeed, but it really is gripping. And I was telling you offline again, one more thing I said for the listeners should hear this is when the publicist approached me from Random House, approached me about reading the book and having you on if we could make that happen. They gave me just the bare first notes about this, and I said, okay, don't tell me anymore. I just want to read it. because the publicists tend to gush. Okay, that's their job. They're pushing the thing out there. But your publicists were just extraordinary about this. They're like, Alex, no, listen, this is an unusual book. Put it at the top of your stack. And I'm so glad I didn't read any background. I didn't Google you. I didn't do any of that. I just read the book. And I'm serious, though. I kind of felt silly for a while there because I thought this is a true story, but I'm reading it like he's a character in a mystery novel or a Stephen King book. It's that well constructed and it's just that well paced and the way it moves. But before we get too much deeper, Dr. Gilmer, I think there's a lot of stuff that happened in this. There's a lot of things that have obviously really happened. There's a lot of factual stuff. And I don't want listeners to, when they get I don't want them to know everything before the book comes out. I mean, do you agree? Do you think maybe we can kind of give the 30,000 foot view? Would that be good, you think? So that they don't miss anything?
Yes, I would prefer that to not give
why
it
don't
all
you
away.
Yeah, you tell us then the things you think people need to know to get this book and get deep into it.
Well, I mean, most people sort of think about this book initially as a true crime book. And, if you are a reader who is into true crime, like I think you're really going to like it, because it's as true as it could be. I couldn't have made this up. And, certainly the beginnings of the story, which for me felt like I was living in a Stephen King novel. And that was what was so paralyzing to me at first, was trying to decide what happened to this guy, who I will say was found to be a beloved doctor in our community, in this rural community outside Asheville. And as I began to get to know him more through his patients, because I inherited his patients. And so that was my first discovery of this man, hearing stories, putting together this kind of mysterious collage in my mind about who he was. The story felt so real. It did feel so Stephen King to me, because that's what my experience was, starting in this pursuit of trying to understand who this other Dr. Gilmer was and why he committed this horrific act. And I was mentioning that in my mind, I was hearing stories from patients and seeing images of who this person was coming together. And as a neurobiologist before medicine, I'm deeply curious about the brain, and started making little guesses about what may have happened to him. And so it took a couple of years, to build up enough stories to really start understanding who this person was. And through that process, I became a little bit paranoid and nervous, and my family was telling me I should leave the area and stuff like that, until I finally needed deeply to understand what happened to him. And that is the beginning of this story. Just, feeling this obsession almost to understand who the other Dr. Gilmer was. And through that process, I learned so much about myself. And entering into the second act was entering into the actual meeting of Dr. Gilmer. So going to the prison and seeing who he was. So I finally decided, I mustered up the courage to go visit the other Dr. Gilmer in prison. And that was a moment I'll never forget, because I had never seen a prison before. Most people don't see prisons, they're hidden from us for the most part. And that was an eye-opening experience, because, as a privileged white man, I just never imagined what it was actually like. And so seeing that the other Dr. Gilmer was seeing and confronting all of my fears. It was a part of, the paranoia that had built up for years. And that was a moment in my life where I really did feel like a character, because it was a foreign experience to me, going to a prison, seeing that for the first time with my, very sort of naive eyes about that, and discovering that this person that I had been imagining for so long to be this monster was actually very sick, appearing in that moment. And, even though I had heard so many good things about him, that he was a beloved doctor, that he was so caring, he had never had a traffic violation before. I was caught between this dissonance of fearing him and wanting to believe that something was wrong with him. And that belief, I think, was born from from the fact that that's what we always want as physicians. Like, we always want to believe our patients. We always want to believe that they can be healed. And, and this taught me a very valuable lesson, like that I had these preconceptions for so long, and that it was going to take a lot of effort to get over these preconceptions. So preconceptions and bias is a big part of this story, because as the other Dr. Gilmer moved through his murder case, many crazy things happened to him. Like, he fired his lawyer, for his own murder trial. He acted bizarrely during his own murder trial. Like, the trial itself could have been an entire book. And I wanted to make it 4 chapters, but Penguin Random House only wanted me to have one trial chapter. So if you're fascinated by criminal law and the justice system, like, you're really going to enjoy this book. My second sort of round of studentship came, as a student of law. So it's also an exploration through my clinical eyes of what the legal system looks like from the inside, and learning from building a legal team, learning through the trial transcripts, which were about 800 pages, like talking to everyone who had been a part of the trial. And that was like very fascinating and ultimately exceptionally heartbreaking, because I learned a lot about the darkness of our system, the darkness of our incarceral system. Yeah, so I did feel like a character. I still feel like a character in the story, because it's still going on.
Well, and again, listeners, we're being a little coy about every detail, because this is just one of those stories. Take it from me. This is one of those stories you don't want to know much about. Don't Google around too much here. I'm not even going to put links to news articles in the show notes like I normally do. I'm going to put links where you can go to his website, and you can buy the book, of course, at mgopod.com. But I just tell you, if you want the full experience here, you should just get the book and read it from cover to cover, because that's what I did. And I was telling Dr. Gilmer earlier that, again, I went kind of that first part of the book, very much a mystery story. The second part, kind of a medical mystery, plus, yes, he just talked about the trial system and all that. And the third part, it goes from there. There's so much more. And then there's just so much that really happened, but it reads so much like beyond true crime to me. It's very well written. And what I think is interesting is the vulnerability you do express, and what you show yourself. And earlier, before we got to the prison side of it, you mentioned earlier that you had a little bit of a paranoia about Dr. Gilmer. You got to the point where you got very worked up in your own mind about this gentleman who you'd never met, from the things you heard, because you'd heard this was a guy who actually took payment from poor folk for his services, like with vegetables and things like that. You contrast that with the monstrous thing he did. You got to a point where you were concerned about the safety of your family.
Well, that was precipitated by a patient who came in and said, "Oh, did you know that the other Dr. Gilmer is getting out?" And I had never thought about that, really. I hadn't envisioned like him getting out, and that caused me to think, well, gosh, if he gets out, like, I'm going to be the obvious target, because I inherited his life, inherited his riches. I stole what was his, in a way. I mean, that was my paranoid brain that was imagining those things. So for a period of time, until I really started digging in to understand, oh, well, he's actually in prison for life. Like, he's not going to get out.
Right.
That helped me, but I try not to dramatize like what happened in the book. But I was genuinely afraid for a period of time, and that triggered a lot of things for me. I mean, you mentioned being vulnerable. Like, through the story, I've tried to make myself vulnerable to the elements of the story as it unfolded, and to see the story through kind of childlike eyes in a way. Like, we ultimately decided to pursue a journalistic process. The This American Life producer and journalist Sarah Koenig, who produced Serial, she came down and joined me for 6 months. And during that time, we were a team, and we set out to intentionally try to figure out what happened to him. And so, so I had the experience of seeing what This American Life story looks like as it builds. And the thing that was unique about our story was that we were literally building it live and recording everything live. So there was nothing, it unfolded in real time.
Yeah, what's interesting is I'm a former journalist, but I was not fully aware of the process with them. When Sarah really did lean on you as, like you said, as a partner and telling this story, I was surprised by this. I kind of just felt like she would tag along and ask questions and she would keep the ball rolling, but it was a give and take from both of you, wasn't it?
Yeah, we formed a true team. And part of it was me, asking her, I want to learn from this process. I want to participate in what the story looks like. And she invited me into our journalistic mission together. So that was really fun and very interesting. And it was also the first opportunity for me to start learning like how to tell stories and to ultimately realize that telling stories is very important. As I started discovering what social justice looked like, and to not jump too far ahead, ultimately I realized that the other Dr. Gilmer was wrongfully imprisoned, so I thought. And so I used some of the skills that I learned from Sarah, like to thread a story together that I thought would be really important to tell to people. Because as a physician, we know that stories that move people more than spewing facts to patients. I think that's a really important message of this book too, is that it's stories move people. They get to the hearts of people, and more so than intellectualizing, which is why I wanted to make myself as authentic and vulnerable as possible.
It's definitely a story. And again, I know some listeners might be frustrated a little because we're not giving all the details here, but here's the thing. This story lends itself so well to storytelling because it is a story well told, and it is all, by the way, remember, a true story. So not only is it now a wonderful book, but it all got rolling when This American Life came calling. And now I don't want to go too far ahead, but I'll just say it's going to be a film.
So there's a major motion picture that's being produced right now. And the other amazing opportunity that I had as a fledgling writer was to write this story alongside of the screenwriter director, Jennifer Fox, who's an amazing storyteller, Emmy nominated, Sundance film winning screenwriter. And so she was learning to tell the story as I was learning to tell the story. And so there was a lot of cross-pollination, which is why in part the book flows like a film in some ways. I also had a lot of tremendous help through my agency, coaching, writing coaching, and learn just invaluable lessons through them about storytelling. So, telling a story oftentimes takes a team, and writing a book takes a team. But it was just a marvelous experience to be around these other incredible storytellers.
It seems to me, though, that you take a very creative approach to being a physician, as you alluded to, and that's carried over into becoming a creative writer and a storyteller. I don't think it's giving anything away to say you're no longer practicing at that same clinic anymore, and you've moved on to other things. But
no, I'm still there.
Are you still there? Wait, are you still there?
I still work 65 hours a week in Vince Gilmer's clinic. Yeah, I have not left. And in fact, I don't think I'll ever leave. Like it's been a calling.
Oh,
being there has been a calling. And, the fact that these two our lives collided in this very bizarre fashion has been like, for me, a test of believing in whether, destiny exists. So, and now I sort of do the destiny exist. And so I plan to keep taking care of my patients, Vince Gilmer's patients, till I no longer can.
Well, thanks for correcting me on that. I think I had in my head that you were on faculty somewhere, but maybe you've done both. I don't know, but have your patients read the book?
So many of them have read the book, and it's been really exciting but fascinating, I think, for them to see what the experience has been like for me, but also to finally realize like what happened like to the other Dr. Gilmer. Most people who knew him just couldn't even dare imagine that he committed this awful act of killing his father. And so, they have been perplexed for years and years, and now they finally are, have have been able to see, gosh, why did his brain unravel?
Yeah.
And the brain unraveling is one of the characters in the book, and it's a real example of looking at the different facets of how a brain can unravel, how neurons can be so vulnerable, how humans can be so vulnerable, how human brains are organs that can fail like any other organ. And that's a really important component of this story, I think, is realizing that we share this cognitive fallibility that that hopefully will enable us to have a better understanding of one another as humans, and to relate in a deeper fashion to why people do bad things sometimes.
Right.
Why and why we should consider treating and healing people rather than just punishing them.
Yeah. When I was a young reporter, you talked about never being in a prison before. I went into a federal prison to do a story. I was very young. And I went into a federal prison, and the warden said, I'm going to tell you, everybody you meet in there is going to be innocent. And if you don't believe, they'll tell you. It was such an eye opener, because it's terrifying. You talk about that when you would go into the prison to visit him, you would kind of go through an anteroom, and then you'd be in this one room, right? This kind of airless little cell kind of thing before you go into the population area, right? And it's a very claustrophobic, or at least it was for me. It's a terrifying feeling, and just hearing the sounds and the way it smells, and all the stories you hear and all that stuff. I think you make such great points in this book about how we do tend as a society warehouse these people in corners away from the populace, obviously. And it's a lot easier to I think, frankly, to dehumanize people when you don't have to see them.
Absolutely. I mean, we do this on many different fronts, don't we? Like we do the same thing with mental illness. We don't want to see mental illness. We don't want to know it. We don't want to believe that we can become mentally ill. We don't want to believe that we could do horrific, things like Vince did. We don't want to see how we treat other humans in prison. I mean, prisons are hidden from our eyes very intentionally, and there's a lot of racism that's wrapped into this problem too. But I really see mental illness and mass incarceration as being on the same spectrum. In fact, 40% of people who are incarcerated have severe mental illness.
Yeah.
40%.
40%.
So that means 800,000 people, mentally ill people, are incarcerated. That means that there are 10 times more people who are severely mentally ill who live in prisons rather than in mental hospitals. And so part of this for me was like a big awakening. Seeing this, I didn't have any intentions of like trying to liberate Vince Gilmer. I just wanted to know what happened to this man and why he went crazy. That was my goal. But once you get inside, once you realize that we are treating other humans to this extent, and once you've taken the Hippocratic oath, as I have, which means that we do no harm, we try to do no harm, and we try to believe in people, or at least believe that there's some potential of healing. Like once you've accepted those two things, you can't turn back. And a lot of people have asked, why did you spend 12 years of your life trying to figure out what happened to this guy? Like, what a lot of people saw that as kind of a waste of time, or felt that they wouldn't have done it if they were in my shoes. And I think a lot of people would have done the same thing that I did, but for me, it's been an exploration of the importance of curiosity, and why it's so vitally important for us to continue to be curious, because curiosity leads us to inquiry, and inquiry leads us down another step to personal transformation and discovery. And that's what this book has been like for me. It's been a self-discovery mission that's really forced me to look inside, and also to realize how vulnerable I am as a human. That I had to be honest with myself about my own brain and its own shortcomings, and it's been so liberating to do that. And I hope that people in the book will resonate with that, that not that we are all so close to killing others, hopefully not, but we, you know, through the examination of our sort of cognitive resiliency and fallibility, you start to see that, gosh, we're really not that far away. Like
Right.
it could happen to us. People crack all the time. I mean, look at Will Smith last week. That was an absolutely like reptilian response to what happened. And once you get out of your resiliency zone, it's easy to, you know, to behave like a reptile.
Yeah. One thing that is, since I had visited prison that time, and I've had people I've known go to prison, and I hear it described, and I hear there's this same prevalent thing of they did it and they got to be punished. And my question is, isn't incarceration punishment? Isn't being separated from the rest of the world, isn't that punishment? Or am I naive? Because it seems to me that the conditions that these prisoners have to endure, the sheer lack of access to any kind of real, except for, with a notable exception, healthcare prevents in his incarceration, it's criminal, I think. So I'm sorry if I'm going on, but it infuriates me, because I just think, well, isn't incarceration the punishment part? Does that mean we have to be cruel to them while they're serving their time? Any thoughts on that?
So incarceration in our country is pure punishment. There are rare examples of prisons that are doing very intentional work to heal. I mean, all prisons across the country have one goal, and that's to deliver the punishment that was given by the judge and the jury. They don't have an incentive to do otherwise. There's no mechanism to try to get people out, you know, early. I mean, there are evolving mechanisms for that, but you know, everyone agrees for the most part that the prisons are designed to punish and not to rehabilitate. You can dig deep and find some examples to the contrary, and I applaud those people. But just as a singular example, Vince's prison, he was in a supermax prison for, you know, the first 8 years of his incarceration. And after I got to know him, he was moved to a more like mental health centric prison, which is still prison. There is not a full-time psychiatrist in that prison. You know, he has spent more time in solitary isolation over the last years than I can even count. You know, that it, you know, the whole point I think I'm trying to make, and that you were making as well, is that, you know, we have to think about it differently. And if you start to think through a clinical lens, that, oh wow, we can actually consider healing crime. We can try to heal these prisoners. There are great examples of this all over the world. You know, in Norway, there's supermax prison. They you know, it's an abomination to keep people in more than 10 years. Like, they try to get people out. They try to keep their incarcerated members connected with the community. You know, they have jobs, they cook for themselves, they live in community still. Like, those things are completely foreign to what we do in this country. And, you know, the notion that like Vince Gilmer had been crying out for therapy, he was asking this whole time for one thing, and that was to have a very simple antidepressant medication, which he knew helped him deeply. And they withheld that medication for a decade. And, you know, ultimately we got him the medicine and he started feeling better, in part because we did, you know, make a sort of a mystery diagnosis that helped to unify and explain all the things that were happening in his brain.
In that part of the book, when you figure it out, my jaw just dropped open. It was interesting to read about when you'd visit him, and of course, you know, junk food was the treat when you'd visit. And I mean, he would just wolf down all this junk food, and you would notice a palpable change in his mental acuity after he consumed some sugar and stuff. Right? Was that what I was reading?
That's right. Yeah, you could see when he consumes caffeine, or when he gets a carbohydrate load, like, you could see his brain just unfolding.
And the idea that, of course, if he just had access to drugs that he needed, he would have been in so much better shape. And then you had this wonderful gentleman who helped with that at the other facility, who folks will read paid a price, though, for for standing up for some things. But we're talking about you going to a small town. You're it's a fish out of water story, and it starts to read like true crime, and then you realize it is way beyond just the criminal act. It is so much deeper than the criminal act. And then this book, The Other Dr. Gilmer, becomes an exploration in the way we as a society treat those among us who need the most help, those among us who, as you said, 40% of people in prison have mental health issues, and they ain't going to get any better in prison without proper help. It's kind of crazy, isn't it? It's the idea of like, well, you've got a really bad arterial bleed here, but we'll give you a Band-Aid. That's not going to probably bode well, right? So what we're seeing here with this, when's the movie coming out?
So we don't know. We I'm not even going to dare to take a guess. It could be a couple of years even.
Sure. Folks, don't wait for the movie though. Read the dang book. It's a great book. You were a Schweitzer Fellow
in Gabon in West Africa.
Early in the book, you talked about your work there, and you were a big Albert Schweitzer, fan sounds kind of silly, but you're a big fan. You really admire Schweitzer. You're a Schweitzer Fellow. He was a doctor, humanitarian, and theologian. And you describe in here treating a young man there who was rapidly deteriorating from a neurologic disease called Guillain-Barré syndrome, and his lungs were paralyzed, and he needed a ventilator to survive. And you say here, if you don't mind me, I'll just read real quick. There was only a bag mask, which meant that someone had to breathe for him. I breathed for him for hours. After my shift, I lay down to sleep on the hospital grounds. When I awoke, he was dead because no one else had breathed for him. I told them that we need to breathe for each other. It seems that you're devoting your life to helping us all breathe for each other.
Well, I think that's our mission as physicians, to breathe for each other. When I was working in Africa, I was really touched by one of Albert Schweitzer's mantras was, my life is my argument. And I always wondered, there's no way I could ever live up to like the model that Dr. Schweitzer offered all of us as sort of mentees, but I've always wanted to try to live my life as my argument, even, not recognizing that I would never achieve the heights of Albert Schweitzer, but it's something we can all do. We can all breathe for each other. We have to. And his philosophy of life was reverence for life, which is very simple, which just means that we have to give reverence. We have to honor all other people, beings, insects, animals who are trying to survive. And that's what we do as doctors. We try to honor people's pursuit of life. So that's what I tried to do for Dr. Gilmer, is to honor his pursuit of life. Like if you came to me as a patient and you had been in prison for 10 years, you would not want me to just think of you as a post-incarcerated person who had multiple felonies. You would not want that kind of doctor to take care of your health. So that's all of our mission, I think, to do that and to try to be examples.
And what an example. Dr. Benjamin Gilmer is a family medicine physician. He has lectured across the country about medical ethics, bias in medicine, and criminal justice reform. He lives with his wife and 2 children in Asheville, North Carolina. And by the way, I feel like I know your family reading this book, and I hope they're well. I do. I really do. That's wonderful people. Your wife, by the way, wow. So impressive. What a partner. Don't let her out of your sight. She's wonderful.
Well, that's how social justice works. It takes a team. It really takes a team.
It takes a team. Yeah. Dr. Gilmer's book is The Other Dr. Gilmer, 2 Men, a Murder, and an Unlikely Fight for Justice. It's available wherever books are sold. There'll be a link in the show notes. You can visit Dr. Gilmer's website for more at benjamingilmer.com. Be sure to check again, as I said, the show notes at mgopod.com for links to Dr. Gilmer's website and much more, including I'll put a link into the This American Life story that started the ball rolling. That's a good primer there. It just, it doesn't have all the latest stuff. But by the way, this story is still ongoing. Things happened with this thing right after this book was going to press. There's things going on with this story. So you owe it to yourself to read The Other Dr. Gilmer. And I'll just close by saying there are 2 Dr. Gilmers, but boy, could we use a lot more Benjamin Gilmers. Thank you for not only sharing this incredible story, sir, but for your efforts to help us all breathe for each other.
Thank you, Alex. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Have you lost your belief in finding a really good mystery thriller? Well, trust me, you've got to have faith. Pilot's faith. Kirkus Review says of the book that Greenwood pulls many tricks from his writer's satchel, has a quirkiness and energy, and snappy, snarky dialogue that keeps things moving briskly. A well-handled mystery with the appropriate twist at the end. Midwest Book Review says newcomers to Pilot will find no barriers to quick immersion in his personality and situation, while prior series readers immediately become involved in another conundrum which tests his skills and the ways in which others view him in his world. Surviving a recent attempt on his life, a weary John Pilot returns to Cross Township, where a bizarre string of shootings has paralyzed the tiny college burg. Pilot joins forces with the law to find out why people are being terrorized in his name and stop it. Unfortunately, when he turns to his family for support, he finds only hardened hearts. People are dying, accusing fingers are being pointed his way, and he has nowhere left to turn. Everything John Pilot believes in, family, sanity, and even himself, are shaken to the core in Pilot's faith. Online Book Club says, it's a gripping and fun story that kept me hooked. Greenwood's writing style is dynamic, and the book reads like a movie script. You can get John Pilot Series number 8, Pilot's Faith, exclusively in paperback and ebook on Amazon.com. And remember, in the end, it all comes down to faith. Pilot's Faith. A Caroline Street Press book by J. Alexander Greenwood.
Thanks for joining us on Mysterious Goings On. Be sure to follow Mysterious Goings On wherever you get your podcast and never miss an episode. Don't forget, you can get the links to books and other things mentioned on the show at mgopod.com. Until next time, keep reading.